Hello and welcome to Storyboard 18. This week we explore two very different yet deeply connected corners of the modern marketing economy. In our first segment, we speak with Toranj Mehta, Vice President Marketing at De Beers, India, to understand how the natural diamond category is being reshaped in a fast-changing luxury market. From shifting consumer intent to the rise of lifestyle-led purchases to Gen Z's evolving relationship with authenticity, origin, and value, Toranj breaks down what's driving demand for natural diamonds in India and how industry-wide storytelling and education are becoming critical to sustaining trust and long-term growth. Later in the episode, we zoom out to examine advertising itself. Joined by Shubhranshu Singh, marketing leader and columnist, we decode what he calls the physics of advertising, a moment when the world's biggest agency networks are confronting a hard truth. As algorithms learn faster than organizations can adapt, creativity no longer scales the way it once did. What went wrong with the great brand builders of our time, and what must change for storytelling to compound again in an AI-led age? This is a conversation about reinvention, relevance, and the future of creativity itself. But first, let's talk about diamonds. Just at the start of the conversation, I want to immediately zoom out, Toranj, and talk about the category itself, right? What are some of the insights or, trends that you have identified that are essentially shaping the category today and for the years to come?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. Whilst you're talking about the whole category and the trends that are shaping us, shaping the category here in India, one of the biggest trends is of women purchasing for themselves. So India was always a self-purchase market, but now that trend is an increasing trend. So 64% of the women purchase diamonds for themselves. And it's not the Western, idea of self-purchase. It is basically women who want to make a decision for the diamond jewelry that they want and the diamond jewelry that they really like. And it doesn't matter who pays for it. It can be the father, the husband, or she herself. But the choice of jewelry is always hers. So that's one bit. Second is they are looking for jewelry that is everyday wear, things that can work for them in office or even in a party. And
versatile.
Versatility, things that really express their own style quotient. So those are the things that they're actually looking at when they're looking at jewelry nowadays.
That's very interesting, and you mentioned this when you were speaking earlier as well, about how it is becoming a personal statement.
Yes.
It is as much, of course, you were talking about confidence, for instance, when people feel more confident when they're wearing a piece of jewelry that either they've chosen or it is their choice at the end of the day. And the other interesting aspect, I think, that comes out of what you said is essentially how diamonds today are perhaps not seen as something just passed down generation to generation.
Yes.
It again becomes a personal statement now versus how it was earlier. Is that coming through more and more with your target consumer?
When we do our focus groups or when we do any kind of qualitative research, it's really entertaining, really enjoyable. Because when the moment you say we are doing this research for diamonds and natural diamonds, the kind of responses you start getting, they're just wonderful. And people are so excited. So in the mind, there is such a lot of emotion that the word diamonds and natural diamonds brings out in women. It's quite encouraging. So one is, of course, you said confidence. Second is women, when they're looking at jewelry, when they're looking at gold jewelry, they know that they're going to get it as an inheritance. It is something that they have to wear during the wedding, and then they will pass it down to their next generation. But when it comes to diamonds, it's far more personal. It is far more about her. She's saying this diamond and this piece of jewelry is for me, and I want to wear it. And then later on, as she grows older, she says, okay, I can give it after I've old enough, and when I'm dead and gone, I'll give it to my daughter or daughter-in-law or whoever. But when she is buying it, it's always for her own personal consumption. It's always
almost
about
like,
her.
Yeah, almost like a sense of belonging versus a sense of just borrowing and then passing it on.
Yes.
But you mentioned occasions like weddings, for instance. But do you see that as well changing? Is that because from the campaigns, for instance, that we've seen, you're not looking at the purchase revolving around only certain milestone events, perhaps. Tell me a little bit more about your strategy going into marketing campaigns and occasions for natural diamonds.
So what we've realized is normally consumers only show us the way, right? So there are many modern day rituals that the younger generations follow, which are not the typical traditional wedding related or occasion related rituals. Things like your second piercing. Every 15-year-old will at least evaluate it once before, either getting it done or discarding it. But that's the choice that she is making. That's her first step towards independence. So the second piercing is one such ritual that is there. Second is the relationship between women besties. Every woman has a bestie. So it's not like, there is any kind of occasion which actually commemorates or celebrates that kind of relationship. So that's something that we picked up on. Third is, if you look at women now, they are far more intentional in their choices that they make. They're far more, and things like manifestation, vision board making are rituals that they follow themselves. And they're very clear, and it's a part of their regular, normal daily life. It's not something that is an addition. So these are the rituals that we've noticed over the past few years that have been gaining traction. And those are the ones that we've actually targeted in our campaigns.
It's interesting because there's also, you mentioned multiple generations of consumers perhaps, but we'll focus on millennials and Gen Z because that I'm assuming that is your core target here. How are they sort of redefining luxury and diamond jewelry purchases? Dig a little bit deeper into insights, maybe certain deviations between how one generation thinks about it versus, newer generations.
So millennial and Gen Z form the majority of our purchase like any other. In fact, the last diamond acquisition study that we just concluded, which was for purchases in 2024, 51% of the natural diamond jewelry was purchased by Gen Z, which for us was a bit of a eye-opener. So, so that was one thing. If you look at millennials want things that are branded so that they get the assurance that, they are getting the right kind of product for the right kind of money that they are paying. They want that larger assurance that what they are getting is worth what they are paying. Whereas for Gen Z, they are far more involved in the kind of what that product is doing for, is there positivity in that product? Is there something that is sustainable in that product? Is there a pipeline of clean, clean vibes per se in that product? So those are the things that Gen Z really looks at, and I think what they also look at are products which hold meaning. And when you look at natural diamonds and when you look at diamond jewelry, all of that is part of what Gen Zs are looking for.
How do you address the question? I mean, Gen Z or even sort of younger millennials are far more discerning in their choices. You mentioned sustainability. There are lots of boxes that they expect brands to check today, right? How are you addressing perhaps some of these things in your campaigns, whether you talk about sustainability or whether you talk about trust or whether you talk about that assurance that comes with a brand, whether it is quality or what it signifies? How are you looking at addressing that in your recent past campaigns or campaigns going forward?
So De Beers Group per se has a program called Building Forever. Now the objective of that program is to ensure that we leave a positive impact even after the last diamond is mined. So, so there is a lot of work that gets done by De Beers Group, and they have a audited sustainability report which comes out every year telling us how much we have progressed in our sustainability measures. So for example, we have a target of being carbon neutral by 2030. And these are things that when a consumer is purchasing, are things that our sales staff will actually be able to explain or show or
and proactively
talk about.
Share.
Yes. So there is a website, diamondisforever.com, and on that you can actually understand the kind of impact natural diamonds have had on livelihoods of people. Even on our website, debeersgroup.com, you will understand the kind of communities or the kind of infrastructure that has been built around a mine to actually create a kind of an oasis in the middle of something like which was like a desert or like a dead area. So there is a lot of stuff that we do that really builds on the value proposition of when you talk about a natural diamond that really engages well with Gen Zs.
And tying in with the overall purpose, like you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, the purpose is make life brilliant. I love it.
Absolutely. One final question. Looking maybe a few years ahead as well, what's your outlook for the category in India, vis-a-vis, of course, global trends, and what are the big opportunities and challenges as well as that you foresee in the next few years? So
India per se is the second largest market for diamonds in the world. It is the fastest growing market for diamonds in the world. And given the kind of indicators that India has currently, the GDP is slated to become double in the next 5 years. Prosperity is going to increase for the Indian households. Number of people moving into the high household income is going to increase. All of that is very positive for us as a industry, because the potential for the market in India is huge. Currently, our penetration for diamonds is only 11%. And
lots of headroom.
Yes, there is a lot of headroom. Our objective over the next 3 years is just to make it 15%. But that amount is also a huge chunk. So that's one of the positive things that we have. I think also what we really need to understand is the differentiation that people need to get when they're talking about natural diamonds and any other alternative product, because we need to be clear that what you're buying, when you're buying a natural diamond, it's something that is precious, something that's valuable, something that's finite, rare, and also it's not you can't copy it, it's inimitable. Because it's a unique product. Every diamond is as unique as a fingerprint. So these are things that we really need to be aware of as consumers. And there is enough options and enough information online for us to be able to make out those differences. So I think consumers really need to understand that when they are looking for options of diamond jewelry. Because one is, when you're buying natural diamonds, it is a lot about what you want to say about yourself or what you want to say to the person you're gifting it to. Whereas, and that really holds a lot of meaning. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind.
The distinction, like you were saying, between fashion and
fashion and precious jewelry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today, Toranj. Pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. This week on Storyboard 18, we decode what Shubhranshu Singh calls the physics of advertising. The world's biggest agency networks, once capitalism's conscience and chorus, are facing a brutal market verdict. Their creativity no longer compounds like code, and their empires of manpower are being outpaced by systems that learn. What went wrong with the great brand builders of our time? Can creativity reinvent itself for the algorithmic age? I'm joined by Shubhranshu Singh, marketing leader and columnist, to discuss why the industry that once taught the world to differentiate has itself become undifferentiated, and what it will take for storytelling to scale again. Thank you for joining me on the show, Shubhranshu. Brilliant to have you here with me again.
Thank you, Dilshad. As always, delighted to be here.
And I'm going to just go straight to the point. You sort of spoke about some uncomfortable truths in your column. What made you write it in the first place? What was the, this provocation? What drove it? Was it frustration with what you saw, or was it a sort of call to arms?
I think the latter. I think I'm an eternal optimist, as you may well know, Dilshad.
Yes.
So there's no question of frustration. And I have been writing about this for a very long time now, the arrival of the digital disruption, the now ubiquitous presence of agentic AI, infinite creative in infinite forms. This is important to advertising as such. And the holding company, the form that these agglomerations have taken, is only a recent phenomenon in the grand sweep of history. But advertising is, in our society, from times immemorial, and it's very important because it's the language of capitalism. Advertising is the bridge between the buyer and the seller. Advertising also, very preciously, though rarely, is the creator of culture. So now, if a business model fails, and as a consequence, the service that they provide to society fails along with it, it is a very dire consequence. And so we have been discussing this in the tribe of marketeers. We have had a very, very close symbiotic relationship with agencies. I began life at Hindustan Lever in 1999, so I have seen the entire evolution in this present millennium. And I feel things are now reaching a stage where if corrective actions are not taken, the world as we know it now, agency, media, content, influencer, advertiser, and the consumer, that equation will get changed forever, and it may not be for the better, which is what drove me to write this.
It certainly ruffled a lot of feathers and rankled a lot of people, but we won't get to, we'll talk about that a bit later. But coming to, why this happened, Shubhranshu, why did the people that were supposed to be, the champions and the aces at communication fail to really communicate their value proposition? What happened?
Firstly, it's very gratifying that it rankled a lot of people. What's a column without a poke? I think, to your question, the business model is essentially a legacy business model. And the arrival of the holding company, which happened in the last 40 to 50 years, actually it began with Marion Harper and resulted in what is now called the Interpublic Group, IPG, in the 60s, but very famously driven by the force of nature, Sir Martin Sorrell and WPP, this conglomerate as its present form, holding companies sweeping from PR on the one end to media planning and servicing on the other, all nature of advertising services being accommodated under one roof. This was a financially great model, but it also led to the financialization of creative duties. And what has happened, therefore, is as the digital tornado hit town, it led to an emasculation of those who created content. Basically, and I've written about this in Storyboard, I call it Go Me's on Talk. Google, Meta, Amazon, and TikTok. Out of $1 trillion of advertising outside of China, they take $700 billion. Naturally, they took it only from legacy media. The gain loss was very clear. Once $700 billion of joy flows out of legacy media, it's a downward spiral. Because remember, advertising is a value exchange. Consumers put up with advertising so as to get subsidized or even free content. And once that amount of value flows out, then the resulting model is on refining the poorer alternatives. And that's not good for society, that's not good for brand building, that's not good, I would say, for democracy, because even getting a vote is a marketing exercise at the end of the day. So the reason why this model of holding companies is progressively been in trouble is, firstly, it does not differentiate between service and a system. Each era, Dilshad, has its governing logic. You have to follow the money. The industrial era was about scaling up efficiency. The information era was about scaling up reach. The algorithmic era was about self-learning systems. But the AI era, the cloud capital era, as Yanis Varoufakis famously called it, is about things that grow while you sleep. So it is about accretive models, it's about owning intellectual property, it's about owning data, it's about proprietary frameworks. It is no longer about taking a brief, renting out a bench of people who are good at developing content and finishing the campaign, or even a retainer model. So you have to distinguish that the service model no longer works, but the system model is hugely rewarding, gets you huge multipliers in terms of valuation. And this is where I think the holding companies have missed the bus a little bit.
There was a great line in your piece. You wrote that agencies built empires of manpower, not memory. Elaborate a little bit on that. You touched upon on the idea of them thinking like service providers and not product creators, for instance. Talk about this. Building empires of manpower versus empires of memory.
Yes. Well, in my humble opinion, it is subject worthy of several PhDs, not one. But let me attempt an arc. See, earlier the model was very simple. You were given a brief, you made a campaign, the top advertisers got top creative talent and attention because they got, say, 15% on the media spends as commission. The model was pristinely applicable to the media industry, which was then thriving. Why? Because the commission was paid by the media entity to the creative. So there was no skin off the client's back. And then you got 15, 16, at times 17+% of production service fees. That was enough on the plate for everybody. And then came this thing about we will be analyst and artisan. We will be producer and promiser. We will be all things to people, east and west. We will be media analysts and we will also be content producers. And then they started shoehorning a variety of functions inside the boundaries of one organization. Mm-hmm. That model floundered a little bit for the simple reason that everybody wanted in the game. So consultancies arrived for business transformation, creative mavens arrived as consultants, influencers arrived riding the mobile phone. So everybody who had a mobile phone was suddenly a creator, a producer, and an influencer. And I would counter the logic by saying there are so many influencers who are not influential, and yet they are influencers. So everybody was in the game, right? Mm-hmm. So what was a military parade suddenly became a dance floor. Mm-hmm. And so if you didn't have permanent partners, you were dancing with somebody you didn't know. And to get permanent partners, you had to be worthwhile, which means you had to have a return on investment, which is where procurement came in. And this is about the time that marketing globally lost its nerve a little bit. Traditionally, Dilshad, there were 4 Ps: product, place, price, and promotion. My wager is that not many CMOs have any role to play when it comes to the first 3. You have to price it based on the business model. You have to have the entire addressable market, so all places are good. You have the product, and the product is what the product is. And then you have promotion, and that's where the CFO arrives. And so suddenly, something which is value accretive, which is actually going to produce the reason why people prefer you, has instead become half a procurement line in a massive CFO Excel sheet. Mm-hmm. And the CMO is looking to build brand, procurement is looking to cut cost, and the model is mutually irreconcilable. In his book, Future Shock, Alvin Toffler wrote that whenever an industry is bombarded with change, they lose their nerve because of the premature arrival of the future. So I would say that the future was a long time coming, but as it stands, it is the premature arrival of the future, and the holding company is still in the legacy model of renting out people, taking retainer fees, thinking ideas, not owning the IP, but giving it on a velvet-lined tray to the client.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There are some fantastic analogies there as well. But just zooming in on the technology aspect, Shubhranshu, I mean, it essentially has turned creativity into code, and it's about algorithms today optimize, its attention and not art. So advertising honestly and truly is stuck in this paradox where it's attempting to scale its art and its form and its craft. So there's this constant battle going on. Mm-hmm. How do you see things playing out? And we'll come specifically to the holding companies and the agency networks. But what do you see playing out currently?
Yeah. Again, I think that's a very fascinating area, and we have engaged on this, and I have written for you on this. There are 2 things that's happening. Potted plants can seem very large, right? But they're not trees in the forest. They don't derive sustenance for themselves. And a lot of the agency work that happens for clients has become potted plant kind of creative, which means you need to constantly water it. The day there's no media money backing it, it just disappears as a happy or a bad memory. Now, the reason why these are actually mutually contradictory, on the one hand, the very word agency means you're acting on behalf of the client for areas where they may or may not have expertise. So you are agentic in the sense that you have custodial responsibilities and you are acting on the behest and on behalf of the client. Whereas today a holding company is actually saddled with quarterly, weekly, even daily targets, clicks, likes, and so on. Now, digital is also a bit of a conjurer's trick. On the one hand, it has led to constant fragmentation. No digital is mass. All digital is technically 1:1. But at the same time, it has led to huge aggregation. So there are these platforms, again, Google, Meta, Instagram, and so on, who rule the roost. So you are template ridden, you don't own the intellectual property, you are fed algorithmically, and that injection is beyond your control. So what is the answer? The answer to my mind is holding companies need to start owning IP, not bodies. They need to own proprietary data frameworks. They need to have models that scale up on context, not on content. Yeah, because context scale up can technically be infinite. Content scale up is only as much as the paid push will get you. And really, I am a big cynic when it comes to organic virality. You know it, I know it, and the viewers know it. How much of virality is paid for and given a twirl, and how much of it arrives genuinely because people love it is a subject for another debate altogether. But in this digital era, the way out to a flourishing future is to think of data, to think of design, and to think of delegation. You cannot own everything under one roof. You have to become orchestrators, not owners. That is the difference.
Amazing. Well put on that front. But okay, let me ask you this then. Do the current holding companies have the appetite or even the language for that matter for this transformation and for this need for their survival period?
Well, the issue that faces the holding companies, because they think of time and material and people, is pretty much the same that governs the logic for IT services companies, for instance. And that's why you're seeing people being let off, code being invaded by artificial intelligence, and so on. If you start thinking of yourselves as system developers and systems which actually reach out to billions of individual consumers and scale up, you are in good health. If you think of yourself as a make-do shop, as in somebody gives you an order to make something, you make it and you do that task and take money for it, you're in trouble because that task will be done faster, more flawlessly, and more repeatedly by automation than by human beings, and that future is already here. So my view is that the perspective change is more important than the design change, and the last thing we need is another agency model. Because as it is, from a client side, I can say, having been a CMO since 2011, it is difficult. There is a cost to the complexity of handling a consultant, a data analyst, a digital shop, a PR firm, a creative duties firm. And very often, individual agencies, because of a variety of reasons, not the least of it was jealousy, said, oh, we want to be pure. So if I do brand A in auto, I promise you I will not do brand B in auto. Well, that logic doesn't hold for consulting organizations. Consulting organizations are preferred because guess what? They do brand A, B, C, D, E, all in auto. So they say, oh, they have a flourishing auto practice. But this is not the case in creative agencies. They say, oh, you work with A, B won't give you business. That era, that definition, those boundary lines, those governing logics, also have to mutate and change forever.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to sort of, stick your neck out a little bit and tell me, out of the holding companies that you see, we spoke about WPP from the Martin Sorrell era. very different WPP. Now, of course, it's going into this sort of consolidation phase. So is it with the other large holding companies. Publicis did this about 5 years ago, and they're currently sort of bearing the fruit or the challenges of that as well. Then you have Omnicom and IPG, you have Havas, and then you have Dentsu, which is in a bit of a dire state. So, in this scenario, who do you think is best placed to capture some of these new model-led growths?
Dalsha, that's a tricky question, and I'm not a betting man, but I can tell you
that if you were a betting man.
Well, the numbers are clearly on the table. I think Publicis has stolen a march over the rest. We will wait to see what the IPG-Omnicom merger brings about. There will be a reshuffle in terms of the pecking order. But clearly, and hats off to Maurice Levy, I think tenure matters a great deal as well, right? England became the ruler of the world because of succession of 3 monarchs ending with Elizabeth I. Same for the Ottoman Empire. So if you have long tenure at the top, you live through many cycles. And I think Maurice Levy was able to do that at Publicis, had the foresight to make investments in digital, first-party data, proprietary frameworks, and as you are correctly saying, it's bearing fruit. But I would wager that the very interesting model to watch is Accenture. I think Accenture has the computing clout, it has the AI friendliness, and it has ingested into Accenture song some really terrific creative talent as well. So while we are talking about these 4 and their total net worth today put together, and I don't follow it on a daily basis, but is in the ballpark of $50 to $60 billion, with Publicis being the leader. If you put that next to a tech list which starts at 4 trillion, they would pale into insignificance. But it's one thing to see market value, and it's the other thing to see a sustainable business model. I would say Publicis is in a very strong position, and I would say Accenture or likes of Accenture are a model to closely watch.
One final question on this subject for now, Shubhranshu. Do you think, in this world that we are currently living in, driven by algorithms, this attention economy, obsessed with metrics, do you still think there is room for imagination? Scaling imagination, I don't know, it's a slightly philosophical question here. But given that you, like you said, you're an eternal optimist, what's your take on it?
No, I think the marketeers have the best chance of survival. And the reason for that is it's still artificial intelligence, not as much artificial imagination. So if there is going to be virtue in having a human in the loop, my bet is that human is going to be an imaginative type rather than a rational type, because the rational piece is going to be done so much better by computing power. And the other thing about it is there are autonomic responses and there are involuntary responses. If I talk to you about yawning, you will yawn, and if I show you an Excel sheet that has $1 billion on it, it will not give you goosebumps. Erector pili, the muscle which twitches to create a goosebump, is beyond human control, but emotion does it. So I am saying when everything else is gone, emotionality, the reason for subjective referencing, and most importantly, bringing a smile to somebody's face, the algorithm can give you a predictive quotient for it, but it cannot make the content that makes that goosebump happen. So my bet is that if there are humans in the loop, it will be right brainers and it will be marketers.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me, Shubhranshu.